Hello again. So, you know how to do a Zoom session over the internet. In this video, I'd like to talk again, go back again to concerns about it, and also to talk about its benefits, and also to talk about Tyre de Chardin. So when I talk about concerns, I refer to what I've said already about confidentiality, about feeling safe yourself, about taking into account the environment in which your clients may be. Mine have been in very protected environments, really. That might not always be the case for many of the kind of clients that I know many therapists work with. So, having mentioned that, I'd like to suggest that if you are doing Zoom like this, or are doing Sandplay like this, that you would report all of your experiences to your national body. And in that way, we have an organization which will be accumulating a record of Zoom sessions. And if it's working very well, that will become apparent. If there are some problems, that will also become apparent. So that's something I'd recommend. And now I'd like to talk about the benefits of this particular way of doing Sandplay. And number one, of course, is kind of obvious, the distance element. And when I referred in my first video to the Sandplay conference I was at in relation to ethics, and there was a person there who was talking about doing Sandplay in Indonesia and the problems of getting there. And if this technique could be used to do proper Sandplay, what a huge benefit that would be when you're thinking of doing it in places like Indonesia. How useful it would be in connecting with people in more underprivileged parts of the world. The costs are just become nothing in comparison to what they would be at present, and the carbon footprint involved. Secondly, this technique would become available to people in hospital. And I'm sure we've all tried to work with people in hospital. I remember one client a good few years ago that I saw on a Saturday afternoon. He had a head injury, a brain injury. And I took the sand tray and lots of objects into a room along his ward. And the whole session would take me 4 hours, and I have to say after about 6 sessions I just couldn't keep it up. So Sandplay would become available to people in hospital, imagine that. And it would also become available to people in prison. And I'm sure there are all sorts of other scenarios where it could become available, where it isn't now. And lastly in this video, I'd like to talk to you about a chap called Tyre de Chardin. I'm going to turn my light on here. Tyre de Chardin he wrote this book, and among others, The Phenomenon of Man and the Future of Man. He was a French Jesuit, and he wrote about the fact that man had evolved as much physically as he could, and that future development was going to be evolution at a spiritual level. None of his writings were published during his lifetime. The church wouldn't allow them to be. They were so kind of unorthodox. But he had a great sort of sense of Christ consciousness, as he would have called it, and talked about the cosmic Christ. And all these concepts nowadays are becoming very real and talked about. I'll just read from the introduction by Sir Julian Huxley. Don't tell me I've lost the page. I don't think I have. No. So, this is from the introduction. Père Teilhard, that's Father Teilhard, was keenly aware of the importance of vivid and arresting terminology. Thus, in 1925, he coined the term Noosphere to denote the sphere of mind as opposed to, or rather superposed on, the biosphere or sphere of life, to describe as a transforming agency promoting hominization, that is, becoming human and developing the consciousness of the human being. I would put it as progressive psychosocial evolution. And then I'll read you another little piece from the foreword by Teilhard de Chardin himself. Fuller being is closer union. Such is the kernel and conclusion of this book. But let us emphasize the point. Union increases only through an increase in consciousness, that is to say, in vision. Now, his big idea, apart from the fact that we hadn't fully evolved yet, was that the way we evolve, the way we become more conscious, is through increasing communication. Increasing communication. And he was talking like 1925 I mentioned there. Phones had just been invented. But he really had a vision that human beings were going to get more concentrated in their connections to one another. And in attempting to formalize this, he described what he called the Noosphere, which I've mentioned there earlier. And the Noosphere was a kind of envelope of consciousness around the world. And actually, 20 years ago, I bought some sites with Noosphere in the name because I thought the internet's looked to me like the Noosphere of Teilhard de Chardin, and I still think it's very close to it. But isn't it wonderful to, why not? He talked about this envelope of consciousness around the world, which everybody had access to, and yet everybody retained their individuality. And isn't it wonderful to think that this energy of the internet, that you can go there, there's a space down there between me and my client, and that space is where healing happens. And that you can sit with someone in Indonesia or Brazil, or I myself in New York or France, and this space between us is contracted in some way, and in that space healing happens. So I just like to kind of acknowledge Teilhard de Chardin and his vision of the Noosphere, and that it's very relevant to the internet of today, and perhaps particularly to the idea of healing happening through this medium. And so that's it for now. Thanks for listening. I'd be really interested in any feedback around this. Thank you.